Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. It's Lee Ankrum here from the Ankrum Institute. It's been a month, and I'm going to talk about something else as I usually do. I hope that everybody is doing well, and um, I hope that everybody's doing well, and that your Thanksgiving was good and wonderful, and you didn't overeat too much. So let's start talking about these diaphragms, the diaphragms. Most of the time, we always think that there's one diaphragm in the body and that diaphragm is the respiratory diaphragm. But actually, it is a main diaphragm, but it's not the only diaphragm. So I'm going to show you a little picture and it's semi-correct. I'm going to show you this picture and I'm going to talk about the representation of the diaphragms. So this is a picture here of some drawing, and what you can see is here in the middle, right here in the middle, is the representation of the respiratory diaphragm. But we also have a pelvic diaphragm, interestingly enough. We have this pelvic diaphragm that's uh, obviously it's in the pelvis. Then what we have is another diaphragm that happens here at the thoracic outlet or inlet. Oftentimes it's called. That's over here. I'm going to back up. It's over here on the body at the level of the clavicles, okay? And but this also doesn't show one of the other biggest main diaphragms, which is actually in the middle of the head. There are three main diaphragms: the respiratory diaphragm in the middle of the body, the pelvic diaphragm, and the diaphragm that's in the middle of the head. And the diaphragm that's in the middle of the head has membranes that are actually going, for the most part, horizontal as well. So you can see that all these diaphragms are basically horizontal. But you can also see in this picture that it's representing that there are diaphragms in each of the joints. Now, I'm going to go with that kind of loosely, but two of the other diaphragms that are actually ones that you know well, but you don't know that they are actually diaphragms is the plantar fascia on the bottom of your feet is a diaphragm. And one of the things that the plantar fascia does is helps to be a pump to help the blood and the lymphatics pump back up the leg. So that's one of the plantar fascia has many roles. One of them is a diaphragm. And of course, I have palmar fascia. I have fascia that's in the middle of my palm as well. But what else is a diaphragm? Do you know that your tongue is actually a kind of diaphragm, which I find kind of interesting. So why is it that we would want to talk about the diaphragm? So let me back up a little teeny bit here and actually kind of give us a little bit of a wider view first. So one of the things that I teach about, especially at the beginning of my training, is that there are multiple systems in the body. And if I asked you to, you could probably name several of the systems. And you have some blood system, right? You have muscular system, you have a bone, a skeletal system. You also have an organ system, so you have a bunch of organs in the organ system. You have, I'm trying to think, there's many systems, but one of the systems that is rarely known about, and I am so lucky to have the education that I had, is a system that's called the pressure system, meaning that it's pressurized. Well, as soon as I hold this little puppy back up, doesn't it look like, oh my gosh, yes, we have one pressure in the cavity between the pelvic diaphragm and the respiratory diaphragm. We have another pressure system between the respiratory diaphragm and the thoracic outlet diaphragm. We have another pressure system between here and in the middle of the head, and another pressure system from that head up. So what we've got is we've got a body that is actually pressurized. And it's important in so many ways. So I'll just give you a little do I want to give you this heads up right now? I'll give you it and I'll probably say it again, is that what are some of the symptoms that show up for somebody when the pressure systems are off? The other thing I want you to recognize when you look at these diaphragms is that they are horizontal in the body. Notice that they are horizontal in the body. All the rest of the tissues, not the organs per se, but the muscles and, excuse me, lots of the fascias actually are tracking longitudinally up and down. So they're tracking up and down, but you have these diaphragms that are actually going horizontal. So within that horizontalness, what I have is these structures that are actually helping me to have pressure within different cavities and stuff. So let's go back to thinking about what are some of the symptoms when my pressures in whichever cavity, when my pressures change. So let's give the example of somebody who has all this inflammation in their digestive system. So their belly gets bloated, okay? So the belly gets bloated and it changes the pressure within that cavity. But what does it do? So if I am picking up the picture again, so if I am in this cavity, in this area here, bloated, if I'm bloated, what's it going to do to my thoracic cavity? It is going to tighten it down. Now, who is it that lives in my thoracic cavity? My heart and my lungs. So, this is not something that a doctor or an AMA person is actually going to put into their thinking cap. The fact that if I have inflammation, in the example that I'm giving you, if I have inflammation in my abdominal cavity, it's going to compact up my thoracic cavity. And then what it's going to do is not let me be able to take deep breaths in, right? One of the other things it does is it does put tension on the heart. Even though, oh, there's no sound? Uh-oh, nobody's got any sound? Somebody just, hey, is everybody not have sound? Okay, I don't know. I've got 7 people here and only one is saying that there's no sound. Maybe it's your thing. Anyway, so what I want to say is that you can have tension patterns happen both in the thoracic cavity, going up and into this, and even pressuring into and creating tension in my neck. That's actually, thank you, Kelly. Okay, other people have sound. So sorry, Shani, that you don't have sound. Thank you, everybody. So anyway, so what's happening here is that with the increased pressure, I can also have ringing in my ears. I can also, when the pressure increases and the pressures are incorrect in my body, I can have vertigo or dizziness. I can have those kinds of things. I can have pressure headaches, that kind of thing. And one of the other big things that is pressurized and it lives in the abdominal cavity is also my kidneys. So if I'm throwing more pressure, if I'm throwing my pressures off, we need to have within that urogenital system, is we need to have the correct pressure within the abdominal cavity, also within the kidneys, so that that is going to work correctly. So many people have that stuff. So I have another picture here of diaphragms, and it's another one of these where it shows that this is the respiratory diaphragm, this is the thoracic diaphragm, this is showing you the one that's in the middle of the head, and there's the pelvic diaphragm. So I always say this, so the respiratory diaphragm being in the middle of our body. So let's talk about that one like the most, and then we'll add the other ones a little bit. The respiratory diaphragm, I always say to people, and I always teach it in my class, that if I could only work one muscle in your entire body, I would work the respiratory diaphragm. And why is that? So let me show you some pictures of the respiratory diaphragm, but it's because the respiratory diaphragm, out of any other structure in the whole body, has relationship to organs, pressure, nerves. You're going to be very surprised at what lives and what hangs out with the respiratory diaphragm. All right, so let's look at the diaphragm itself. So let me get close enough here. I got to look at which one's which. Okay, so this is looking up from the bottom. So we're looking up at the diaphragm here from the bottom. And what it does is it attaches to your rib cage, okay, in the front. And then it's like a big parachute, which I'm going to show you a picture like that. And it comes in the back. It goes all the way and attaches inside your back and attaches to the top of my lumbar vertebrae. So it's attaching to my lumbar vertebrae. And what it does is, if you can believe this, is it shows it individually, but it's like the fascia that the diaphragm has merges in, and here's your psoas, your hip flexor. That's your big hip flexor. So fascially, they're actually connected. But even more important than that, let's talk about this. If you look on the vertebrae here in this picture, you can see that the aorta, the descending aorta, coming from your heart, is going down in the front of coming through the diaphragm and goes down the front of my vertebrae. So there's something that's going right through my respiratory diaphragm. Here we have this big hole over here, that great big one. Now that's on my liver side, and that's my vena cava. The vena cava is where all the blood goes back up from all of my lower body, going back up to my heart. And another biggie right here, you see this weird little dipsy doodle right there, is that my esophagus is coming through. So we have new blood coming down. We have old used blood going up through the diaphragm, and we have your esophagus coming through the diaphragm. But even more important about what with that esophagus coming through, I don't know how many of you have heard of the vagus nerve, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the vagus nerve, but it's all kind of in the last 10 years, we've become much more aware of the sympathetic fight or flight system and the vagus, which is the parasympathetic and stuff. So here's the super interesting thing. I don't think my picture has a picture of it, but your vagus nerve is wrapped like a web around your esophagus. So it is going through your respiratory diaphragm. So here's my vagus nerve going through my diaphragm with my esophagus. And the thing about it is if I have increased pressure or I have any kind of tightness, even at the opening where the esophagus is going through, then what happens is that I've got tensions into that vagus nerve, vagus nerve. And what's supposed to happen on the vagus nerve is that's supposed to help actually relax me. And actually, all that vagus nerve goes down to my gut and is actually supposed to have my gut be relaxed so that I can eliminate well. It's all so interrelated. That's why I find this body so interesting. So anyway, so what we have here is I'm showing you a picture from the side of what that respiratory diaphragm looks like. It looks like a big dome. It looks like a big dome. I always say when I tell people about it that it's like a parachute or an umbrella within there, okay? So you really have that. And here, oh, I think this is so interesting, here's the interesting thing about the respiratory diaphragm. When you were developing in the womb, your respiratory diaphragm developed in the level of your neck, okay? And then what did it do? I'm going to step back, is that what it did was pressurize downwards and create into the cavity, which allowed the lungs to actually develop. So part of the pressure system began when the respiratory diaphragm, which started in your neck, actually pressured downward and went to live where it is. But the interesting thing is that the nerve that actually innervates the muscle of the respiratory diaphragm is in your C5 level, where it started. I just find that stuff kind of interesting. I hope you do too. So anyway, so let's go on from there. So what lives underneath my respiratory diaphragm? On the back side, I have my kidneys and my adrenals right there. Okay, and then as I go forward on the left side, underneath, is that the left side? On the left side of, in front of my kidney, my left kidney, is my pancreas, and then my stomach. And then next to all those organs is my spleen. So that's what's hanging out just underneath my respiratory diaphragm on the left-hand side. On the right, on the right-hand side, I have this big old liver. I've got my big old liver and the kidney also, like I said, the two kidneys and the adrenal. So imagine that those guys are actually going to be affected if anything is going on with my respiratory diaphragm. One of the funny things about that diaphragm, you guys, is that when you get into, let's just say, more anxiety, or you're worried more, and the tightening that's happening in the respiratory diaphragm, it's funny how the respiratory diaphragm wants to go home back up to C5 where it started from. It's kind of an interesting deal. That's why all the body workers or whatever find that people's diaphragms are so tight and that they rise up. And what does that do? When a diaphragm does that, it's creating tension on your lungs and on your heart. I want you to know that, and on your esophagus. So those things are really getting tightened down in that cavity. And I'll tell you, I've had people who I feel like it's a rock up there. And those are people that have ended up with some kind, I wasn't able to help them, and ended up with some kind of heart attack or, things like that. So it's been kind of interesting. Anyway, I didn't digress. I just went all over the place. So let's talk about the pelvis diaphragm. I'm going to just show you a quick picture of what it looks like. I apologize for coming out of the thing, but that's what the pelvic diaphragm is. The pelvic diaphragm is muscle and fascia that is filling the entire pelvic floor. And once again, it is a structure that's like a sling. So it has a little bit of vertical, but it definitely has that horizontal quality. Okay, so it is horizontal. And I'm going to show you, that was a female, this is a female pelvis that I'm showing you here. So now what I'm going to show you is what's in a female pelvis. I just have to look, okay. So this is your back. This is the bone at the bottom of your back, your sacrum. These are your pubic bones. And here is my bowel. And then I have my vagina, and then I have my bladder. So one of the deals is embedded in all this fascia that's making up the pelvic floor diaphragm. You also, of course, have blood vessels and nerves running through this as well, but you also have all of those. So if I start to get a tight pelvic floor, it is definitely going to affect everybody up the other diaphragms going up. But the other thing it'll do is, when a diaphragm gets really tight, then what happens is that everybody who lives in there is affected. So bowel, bladder, uterus, those things are all affected by having tensions in the pelvic floor. Those can be created by a fall on the tailbone. Those can be created by dysfunction in any one of those organs. So if there's any organ that's in dysfunction, what ends up happening is that it tightens whatever the diaphragm is. So if you have adrenal stress, like I was just talking about in the respiratory diaphragm, how the adrenals live in the back tucked up, then what happens is the diaphragm begins to tighten itself. So it's sort of a reciprocal thing. I can have a tight diaphragm that is then going to affect all those organs. And conversely, if I have organs that are in dysfunction, they're going to affect the tissues. And today we're talking about the diaphragms, and they will affect the diaphragms. So it's all pretty, personally, I think it's kind of interesting. But anyway, that's me. That's me. So in the middle of our head, the name of this diaphragm, it actually has a name. It's called the tentorium. And the tentorium is shaped like a horseshoe in a horizontal position in the head. And it is definitely working and in relationship to the other diaphragms. It is definitely. And what happens is that it's such an interesting diaphragm up there because it's attaching to the bone of the inner ear. It is attaching right along the edge of where your inner ear is inside your head. That's what that diaphragm is actually doing. That's part of it. What else it does? Now see, I think this is like, wow. So what else it does is the position of it around the head. It comes around and actually attaches in the front behind your eyes, the bone of your eyes, and it crisscrosses, it rotates and attaches, and then it becomes a fascial, like, not a plug, but a fascial topping over your pituitary gland. How about that? I mean, oh my gosh, the interrelationships. How can anybody look at a symptom and just get fixated on a symptom when what's going on, there's so much interrelationship between things. So this tentorium is a big deal. And most of us, when we went through the birth canal, kind of got all screwed because otherwise I wouldn't be wearing glasses if I didn't, because this happened like I had to wear glasses early. So in that torquing that happens inside the head, of course the tentorium itself is also going to get torqued. And let me also say that when that happens is you get children with all these ear infections. You get a lot of ear infections coming out of that. So one of the deals is that you have to help, derotate all of that. And once you have correct pressures into here, it can also help the other diaphragms. They all help each other, stay regulated and stay in good, stay in more correct pressure, because it's important that our bodies are pressurized in the correct way. So anyway, that was my talk about the diaphragms. Oh, somebody asked me, let me say this. Somebody did ask me that did I actually at one time mention that the diaphragms are in relationship to the chakras? And that would be no. When I actually made mention about the chakras and the relationship to what I was lecturing about was actually something called the central chain of fascias, which was all the glandular system and the organ system that runs through the body is related to the chakras. So when the person who asked me that watches this, you'll notice that it's not part of that. Definitely not part of that. So I just want to definitely say, oh, anybody that knows anybody that might be interested in, being a student and learning more about this stuff and really learning how everything all fits together, is we're starting a new program in January. We have a bunch of people signed up. I'd love to see more, and I'm happy to answer any questions or do any of that. So we're just sort of getting it together for a new class in January. I'm excited about it. And the date it starts is the 21st of January. So it's the third week of January. And I'm happy to talk with anybody or anything. The other thing I'm going to do is I finish work at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. And next month, what I'm going to do is do this earlier so that I'm not sitting here waiting for dinner. So I'm going to probably, and I'll post on Facebook what time, but most likely it'll be 4:15 coming in the future. But there's many people that watch it later and don't watch it with me. But I do want to thank everybody that joined me today. I really appreciate you. And thank you. Oh, and happy holidays, big happy holidays. And if you have any thoughts or any ideas about something you'd like me to talk about in the body, I am happy to do that. Whether it's TMJ or, how the eyes work, or the relationship of eyes to learning disabilities, which I don't have a lot of that, but I could do a 5-minute deal on that. But anything that you'd like to know about, I'd be happy to try to talk about. Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everybody. There you go.